Hello and welcome back to our story, 250 Years of the United States of America. We're coming back after the break. Hopefully y'all had a good Labor Day. This week we will be covering 1817 through 1820, and obviously today beginning with 1817. National rebuilding continues to occur across America after the War of 1812. We've got a fun story about possible cryptid sighting in New England. And we begin our next major story with Andrew Jackson in the South and some Indian relations. So without further ado, we're going to get into the episode. Welcome to 1817 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and we'll begin today's story with a bit of a look into some iconic American art. Very near the end of last year, an American painter, John Trumbull, wrote to Jefferson and Adams, saying, 28 years ago I had the honor of painting in London your portrait in my picture of the Declaration of Independence. The long succeeding period of war and calamity paused and suspended thy progress in the work of which that picture was a most important part. Peace is at a length restored. I have resumed my task. That picture is finished. The government of the United States are restoring to more than their original magnificence. The national buildings there, which were destroyed in the fury of war, and I have thought this the proper opportunity to make an application for public patronage and to request to be employed in decorating the walls of those buildings with the paintings of national history which have employed so many years of my life. I trust it will be thought that the Declaration of Independence, with portraits of those eminent patriots and statesmen who then laid the foundation of the nation, as also the military pictures with portraits of heroes who either cemented that foundation with their blood or lived to aid in the superstructure, will be appropriate ornaments for the halls of the Senate and the Representatives, as well as impressive lessons to future statesmen and heroes. On January 1st of this year, Adams sends a reply saying, Your kind letter of the 26th of December has given me more pleasure than it would be prudent or decent for me to express. Your country ought to acknowledge itself more indebted to you than any other artist who ever existed, and I therefore heartily wish you success. But I must beg pardon of my country when I say that I see no disposition to celebrate or remember, or even curiosity to inquire into the characters, actions, or events of the Revolution. I am therefore more inclined to despair than to hope for your success in Congress, though I wish it with all my heart. I should be glad to be informed of your progress. And Thomas Jefferson also responds, and he says, I rejoice that the works you have so long contemplated are likely to come to light. If the legislature, to the reedification of the public buildings, will take up with spirit their decoration also, yours must be the first objects of their attentions. I hope they will do it and honor themselves, their country, and yourself by preserving these monuments of our revolutionary achievements. Trumbull is ultimately successful, and Congress places 4 of his paintings in the United States Capitol building, those being the Declaration of Independence, the cover of our 76 episode, the surrender of General Burgoyne, the surrender of Lord Cornwallis, the cover of our 1781 episode, and General George Washington resigning his commission, all of which are well-known and really fantastic paintings of key moments of our revolutionary history. It is now March 3rd, and it is the last full day in office for President James Madison. Today, he vetoes John C. Calhoun's bonus bill, which aims to use the bonus of $1.5 million and future profits from the Second Bank of the United States to fund internal improvements, such as roads, canals, and other infrastructure projects across the country. The bill passed both the House and Senate with significant support, but Madison vetoes the bill on constitutional grounds, saying that the Constitution does not explicitly grant Congress the power to fund internal improvements like roads and canals. It's an interesting note that the presidential power to veto bills was first used by Washington, though in his 2 terms he only used the power twice. Since then, neither Jefferson or Adams has used the power, but now the outgoing Madison, across his 2 terms, has used the veto power a total of 7 times. Tomorrow, James Monroe is set to be sworn in as the new president of the United States, becoming the 5th man to hold the office. As we mentioned in last year's episode, his win was relatively assured from the moment the Republican caucus picked Monroe, and the Democratic-Republican majority in the Electoral College handily secures the executive branch for another 4 years. Now arriving at March 4th, James Monroe is sworn in as the 5th President of the United States, and Daniel D. Tompkins is sworn in as the 6th Vice President. Let's listen in now for a short excerpt from his inaugural address. In commencing the duties of the Chief Executive Office, it has been the practice of the distinguished men who have gone before me to explain the principles which would govern them in their respective administrations. In following their venerated example, my attention is naturally drawn to the great causes which have contributed in a principal degree to produce the present happy conditions of the United States. They will best explain the nature of our duties and shed much light on the policy which ought to be pursued in the future. From the commencement of our revolution to the present day, almost 40 years have elapsed, and from the establishment of this Constitution, 28. Through this whole term, the government has been what may emphatically be called self-government. And what has been the effect? To whatever object we turn our attention, whether it relates to our foreign or domestic concerns, we find abundant cause to felicitate ourselves in the excellence of our institutions. During a period fraught with difficulties and marked by very extraordinary events, the United States have flourished beyond example. Their citizens individually have been happy, and the nation prosperous. Under this Constitution, our commerce has been wisely regulated with foreign nations and between the states. New states have been admitted into our Union. Our territory has been enlarged by fair and honorable treaty, and with great advantage to the original states. The states, respectively protected by the national government under a mild, parental system against foreign dangers, and enjoying within their separate spheres, by a wise partition of power, a just proportion of the sovereignty, have improved their police, extended their settlements, and attained a strength and maturity which are the best proofs of wholesome laws well administered. And if we look to the condition of individuals, what a proud spectacle does it exhibit! On whom has oppression fallen in any quarter of our Union? Who has been deprived of any right of person or property? Who restrained from offering his vows in the mode which he prefers to the divine author of his being? It is well known that all these blessings have been enjoyed in their fullest extent, and I add with peculiar satisfaction that there has been no example of a capital punishment being inflicted on anyone for the high crime of treason. Some who might admit the competency of our government to these beneficent duties might doubt it in trials which put to the test its strength and efficiency as a member of the great community of nations. Here, too, experience has afforded us the most satisfactory proof in its favor. Just as this Constitution was put into action, several of the principal states of Europe had become much agitated, and some of them seriously convulsed. Destructive wars ensued, which, as of late only, have been terminated. In the course of these conflicts, the United States received great injury from several of the parties. It was their interest to stand aloof from the contest, to demand justice from the party committing the injury, and to cultivate, by a fair and honorable conduct, the friendship of all. War became at length inevitable, and the result has shown that our government is equal to that, the greatest of trials, under the most unfavorable circumstances. Of the virtue of the people and of the heroic exploits of the army, the navy, and the militia, I need not speak. Such then is the happy government under which we live, a government adequate to every purpose for which the social compact is formed, a government elective in all its branches, under which every citizen may by his merit obtain the highest trust recognized by the Constitution, which contains within it no cause of discord, none to put at variance one portion of the community with another, a government which protects every citizen in the full enjoyment of his rights and is able to protect the nation against injustice from foreign powers. Alright, so a stirring and patriotic summation of the United States thus far kicks off Monroe's presidency and, as we'll soon discuss, an era of peace in America. Reflecting this, Monroe actually uses the word happy 5 times in this public address. You just caught it twice there. Now, the stock market is active enough to encourage brokers to create a formal organization, and a constitution is adopted on March 8th of this year, creating the New York Stock and Exchange Board, the forerunner of today's New York Stock Exchange. From the beginning, regulations govern trading, and the Constitution spells out detailed rules for the transaction of business and imposes fines to keep disorderly brokers in check. The new stock exchange rents a room at 40 Wall Street, where the brokers gather twice a day to trade a list of 30 stocks and bonds. From the podium, the president calls out the name of each security, and brokers shout bids and offers from the chairs assigned to them. This is the origin of the term seat, which ever since has signified a membership on the NYSE. On April 15th, the first American school for the deaf opens in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's called the Connecticut Asylum for the Education and Instruction of Deaf and Dumb Persons. This is the first school to teach a mixture of French signs while also adapting some of the students' own favorites into the course to create what will soon become standardized and known as American Sign Language, or ASL. The school's success will actually catch the attention of the new President Monroe and secures government funding for more land and a larger facility as the institution grows and attracts more deaf people from around America. Now, the Treaty of Ghent that ended the War of 1812 essentially called for a cessation of hostilities and for the status quo from before the war to be restored. It did not, however, call for any disarmament in North America, so both the United States and Britain-held Canada have spent the last years pumping out ships for use on the Great Lakes to prevent future hostilities. On the 29th of April, however, a treaty is signed between the United States and the United Kingdom and calls for an elimination of naval fleets in the Great Lakes, excepting small patrol vessels. This treaty is supplemented by further agreements made next year, so stay tuned for that, but it alone marks an important move toward lasting peace with the country which twice has engaged in war with America and twice lost interest in the conflict after successful American stubbornness. As institutions continue to be formed across America, the first private mental health hospital opens in the United States, the Asylum for the Relief of Persons Deprived of the Use of Their Reason. This is now called Friends Hospital and is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The social and medical concerns which Quakers hold regarding psychiatric problems guides the hospital in not only its physical site plan, but also the methodology of treatment and even the manner of its fundraising. Alright, now on the 24th of June, Thomas McKean passes away, and as this brave man signed the Declaration, we'll recount his life now. Thomas McKean was born in 1734 in Pennsylvania and received his basic education at home until age 9. After completing his studies, Thomas went to Newcastle, Delaware to study law under his cousin David Finney. A few months later, he was appointed as a clerk in the Court of Common Pleas, and through his hard work, talent, and industriousness, he was admitted as an attorney in the Court of Common Pleas to Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex before attaining the age of 21. In 54, he was admitted to the bar and soon became Deputy Attorney General and Clerk of the Delaware Assembly. In 58, McKean traveled to London to further his legal studies at the Middle Temple. Returning to America, McKean was elected to the House of Assembly from Newcastle in 62, and he and Caesar Rodney were appointed delegates to the Stamp Act Congress in 65. While there, McKean makes a far-reaching proposal to change the voting procedure. His proposal was later adopted by the Continental Congress and continues to this day in the United States Senate. His proposal was that no matter the size or population of a colony, each one would get an equal vote. McKean was appointed a delegate to the First Continental Congress in 74, and in late June of 76, when the debate for independence began, Caesar Rodney was absent, having returned home to Delaware, so McKean sent a dispatch to Rodney requesting he ride all night if necessary to break the tie, as he knew Rodney was also in favor of independence. One of those things that gets a little bit muddled in history finds us here, as there's some difference of opinion as to when Thomas McKean signed the Declaration of Independence. Some historians believe that he signed it on August 2nd, as most did. Others say he didn't sign until 1777, and he was the last of the 56 men to sign the document. That seems to be the most commonly accepted belief, but there is contrary evidence. The original copy of the document is deposited with the Delaware Secretary of State, but when the printed copy is released, McKean's signature is found to be missing on both the 1777 and even the 1800 editions. On the 28th of July in 1777, McKean received from the Supreme Executive Council the commission of Chief Justice for Pennsylvania. He was to hold this position for the next 22 years until 99. On July 10th of 1781, McKean was elected president of the Continental Congress, and he served in this role for a number of months until November 4th. McKean later argued in favor of the passage of the Constitution and was elected governor of the state of Pennsylvania. He held that office until December 20th of 1808, when he retired from public life. On June 24th of this year, at the age of 83, Thomas McKean passes away. With his passing, there are now only 5 signers of the Declaration still alive. His remains are interred at the First Presbyterian Church on Market Street in Philadelphia. The slab on his grave reads Thomas McKean, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, President of Congress, Chief Justice, and Governor of the state of Pennsylvania. America commemorates its Day of Independence on July 4th, but this day also bears significance as workers break ground on the Erie Canal at Rome, New York, and the entire story of this project is fascinating, so much like the workers do today, let's dig in. When you trace back the origins for the idea for this canal, it seems that they come from a destitute flour merchant named Jesse Hawley. Now, considering that the canal will in the future lead to amazing financial success for the state, it's even more impressive that in 1806, when the plan is first proposed, Hawley is in debtor's prison, incarcerated for debts incurred in his trading business. He published essays in a local newspaper, anonymously signing them Hercules. Thankfully for Hawley and for the state of New York, a man in a position to realize the plan took note of these essays, New York City Mayor DeWitt Clinton, who was the man who ran against James Madison in 1812. He heard of Hawley's essays and enthusiastically adopted the canal project and began lobbying to build the canal, eventually securing funding that led to today's groundbreaking. We won't skip ahead, so we'll provide an update on the work when the canal opens, but even before ground is broken, Thomas Jefferson voices his doubt for the project, saying that making a canal of 350 miles through the wilderness is little short of madness. A new phrase is coined, and it's one that I've hinted at a little bit when discussing the stories of peacetime America that we will be covering over the next week or two. Benjamin Russell, in his Columbian Sentinel newspaper, uses the phrase era of good feelings for the first time. The article that accompanies the first use of this phrase reads, "During the late presidential jubilee, many persons have met at festival boards in pleasant converse, whom party politics have long served. We recur with pleasure to all the circumstances which attended the demonstrations of good feelings. The dinner, given by the venerable ex-President Adams, consisted of nearly 40 covers, was arranged with noble simplicity and unaffected elegance, and embraced as guests eminent men of all political parties." Indeed, with the Democratic-Republican supermajority, there's less to fight about. America is essentially a one-party nation. Republicans hold 30 out of the 42 seats in the Senate, clearing 2/3, and 146 out of the 185 seats in the House, sailing past 2/3 and actually attaining more than 3/4. They obviously also control the executive with James Monroe, and while the judicial branch is meant to be free from party politics, it's fair to say that 5 of the 7 justices are Republican as well, with William Johnson, Henry Livingston, Thomas Todd, Gabriel Duval, and Joseph Story all appointed by either Jefferson or Madison, and only John Marshall and Bushrod Washington appointed by Adams, the latter being George Washington's nephew. Now, I don't particularly put too much weight in stories of cryptids and the like, but it's always fun to look into these legends, which are usually extremely localized. The Mothman, Lizardman, Sasquatch, and whatever else. Well, today, a, quote, large marine animal supposed to be a serpent is seen near Cape Ann, Massachusetts, and soon dubbed the Gloucester Sea Serpent. This is actually not the first time that the creature is spotted. Back in 1641, the English traveler John Jocelyn described a sea serpent seen in nearly the same spot 3 years earlier by passerbys off the coast of Gloucester, and he wrote, "They told me of a sea serpent or snake that lay coiled up like a cable upon a rock at Cape Ann. A boat passing by with 2 English on board and 2 Indians. They would have shot the serpent, but the Indians dissuaded them, saying that if he were not killed outright, they would be in danger of their lives." So, what's different about this year is that it's not just 1 or 2 sightings. Throughout the summer, hundreds of people, including the crews of 4 separate whaling vessels, claimed to see a giant serpent in Gloucester Harbor. What's especially satisfying is that the creature is positively identified, at least according to the New England Historical Society, and they say that the Linnean Society of New England travels to Gloucester to collect evidence, distributing questionnaires to witnesses. A sea captain named Rich decides to find out the truth, and he knows that sea serpents show up when barometric pressure is high and the sea is glassy. He hires a crew of respectable men who had seen the serpent, and with them they sail to a spot where the sightings have been reported. They, in fact, spot the creature and decide to harpoon it, but first they have to chase the monster for 5 days. When they finally do harpoon it, it is wrapped in a sail and brought on board, and they discover its true identity. It's a bluefin tuna. So, how did these men mistake a bluefin tuna for a 100-foot-long sea serpent? Well, we actually have the answer in Captain Rich's own words. He says, quote, "The supposed serpent is no other than the wake of a fish such as we have taken." He explains that on a calm day, a fast-moving tuna makes little waves of the true color of the ocean in its wake, and these waves appeared at a distance like the humps of a serpent's back, hence why the sightings always occurred on glassy days. Alright, now on September 17th, James Monroe returns from his grand tour and moves into the White House. The following day, the National Intelligencer notes with approval, "It was with great pleasure we once more beheld the President of the United States entering the dwelling appropriated by the nation to his use." It's been a pretty quick turnaround to get the White House livable again after the burning of it back in 1814. And we'll discuss more because there's a grand opening to be held next year, but for now, the president once again lives in the president's house. On the 22nd, John Quincy Adams becomes the United States Secretary of State and is the 8th person to hold the title. I bring it up not only because it's significant due to his heritage, he's the son of America's second president John Adams, but he goes on to make a name for himself in our story, though we'll have to wait for some time to hear about his most significant effects. December 10th brings an interesting milestone for the Union as Mississippi is officially granted statehood, becoming the 20th state. So let's look into this journey, and before we begin, try and picture in your head a map of our states. What state is directly to the east of Mississippi? If you guessed Alabama, you'd be correct. Probably an easier one for y'all in the south than yous in the north, but a basic question. As of this year, however, Alabama is not a state. It's actually a territory. I think this is interesting because, for the most part, beginning with the 13 colonies, states have begun gradually expanding west, always with an eastern neighbor already in the Union, and that phenomena is caused from the old land claims of the colonies extending west from what their currently known borders are. The journey to statehood for Mississippi, however, begins not with old colonies expanding west, but instead started in 1798. The Mississippi Territory has expanded over time to encompass what will one day be two states, Mississippi and Alabama. So by this year, settlement has grown rapidly, but only on the western side, and politics have advanced so far that a major division finally takes place. The western portion of the territory owes its growth to being situated along the Mississippi River and the fertile land that creates. Settlement has surged, and towns like Natchez and Washington thrive as centers of trade, law, and governance. Farmers, planters, and merchants demanded the rights for statehood, believing that the region has matured enough to govern itself as a full partner in the Union. A major concern from Washington is balancing free and slave states, and granting Mississippi admission as a state while creating a separate Alabama territory to the east accomplishes both these goals. Back in March, Congress formally approved the division, and the western portion of the Mississippi Territory was authorized to draft their state constitution and prepare for admission to the Union as Mississippi. Meanwhile, Monroe appoints William Bibb as governor for the Alabama Territory, and as its own territorial administration under federal oversight, it builds towards eventual statehood itself. Now, delegates from the territory of Mississippi gathered in Washington in July for a constitutional convention. That's Washington, Mississippi, just to be clear. The document they produced, modeled on Southern state constitutions, secures slavery as a legal institution and establishes the framework for a planter-dominated society, And after that constitution is approved, Congress votes to officially admit Mississippi as the 20th state of the Union, while Alabama continues its territorial phase of history, wedged between Mississippi and Georgia. One other tidbit is that for now, Mississippi flies the same 15-star and 15-stripe flag that's been the official flag of the United States since Kentucky's entry to the Union in '92. Though that'll change next year, so listen to our 1818 episode for a big update on the United States flag. Our next story, and the last one for this year, will carry us through to 1818, and as is normal with these military campaigns, requires a bit of setup. This year, tensions along the southern border reach a breaking point. The Florida borderlands, still under Spanish rule, serve as a refuge for Indian groups and runaway slaves. Seminoles, a confederation of Creek refugees and other Indian peoples who have gathered in the peninsula, live in villages scattered across northern Florida. For American settlers in Georgia, these lands appear threatening. They fear raids on their farms from the south and resent the safe haven of Florida just below them. The United States government views Spain as too weak to police the territory, and the more hawkish part of American politics begins adding pressure for action. Really, the chain of events, though, that leads to this story began in summer. American forces under Edmund P. Gaines moved into southern Georgia and established Fort Scott on the lower Flint River, just above the Florida boundary. Now, it is created and placed there not only to guard settlers, but also to project U.S. power and authority. As the Seminoles and their allies see the fort as a threat, sporadic skirmishes occur. Late in November, the conflict escalated to the point of requiring further United States involvement, as U.S. soldiers were attempting to move provisions by boat along the Apalachicola River, and Seminole warriors ambushed the convoy. And the attack later becomes known as the Scots Massacre, because it kills more than 30 soldiers, women, and children, with only a handful of survivors. Now, the issue in the South is compounded by the Treaty of Fort Jackson from 1814, which forced the Creek Nation to cede millions of acres, and many Red Stick survivors also fled south into Florida to join these Seminole communities and continue their resistance. To the U.S., these are dangerous rebels hiding beyond the reach of law. To the Seminoles, they're defending their homeland. By December, the decision is made in Washington that the situation cannot be left unresolved, so Secretary of War John C. Calhoun sends a letter to Major General Andrew Jackson, already renowned from his campaigns against the Creeks, and we'll hear this message now. Sir, you will repair with as little delay as practicable to Fort Scott and assume the immediate command of the forces in that section of the Southern Division. The increasing display of hostile intentions by the Seminole Indians may render it necessary to concentrate all the contiguous and disposable force of your division upon that quarter. The regular force now there is about 800 strong, and 1,000 militia of the state of Georgia are called into service. General Gaines estimates the strength of the Indians at 2,700. Should you be of the opinion that our numbers are too small to beat the enemy, you will call on the executives of adjacent states for such an additional militia force as you may deem requisite. With this view, you may be prepared to concentrate your forces and to adopt the necessary measures to terminate a conflict which it has been ever the desire of the President, from considerations of humanity to avoid, but which is now made necessary by their settled hostilities. If the exact mission laid out seems a little bit vague, you're not crazy, it truly is. Jackson is given wide latitude to suppress Seminole resistance and secure the border in the manner he sees fit. I try to exclusively stick to very well-sourced, well-verified information, and I really don't like going out on limbs. So when I say this with a bit of context built in, but What it seems like is that the government gives Andrew Jackson a wide leash, knowing that he'll probably go further than they could officially encourage him to do so, but in order to deliver the desired result. But you can tell me if you think that that is an oversimplification or a misunderstanding. The events we'll cover next year lend at least some credence to the idea, I believe. Now, for Spain, the crisis in their policing of their colony reveals its vulnerability. Florida is still legally its territory, but its garrisons are weak and scattered, and Spanish officials protest American incursions but lack the actual strength to stop them. Britain, though officially at peace, maintains trading links and hence some influence among the Seminoles, adding another layer of suspicion in American minds. Thus, as we come to the end of 1817, the First Seminole War has begun. What started as a series of frontier disputes and raids has hardened into open conflict, driven not only by competing claims to land, the question of fugitive slaves, but also the unanswered questions from the Creek War. The United States views the campaign as a necessary defense of settlers and a strengthening of security of its borders, and we'll get further into all of this in the next episode, but we won't be focusing on just recounting battles. Instead, we'll be looking more closely at how the conflict unfolds and how it's perceived, and some of the political and diplomatic fallout from Jackson's campaign. Well, that is all I've got for 1817. Thank you for coming along this journey with me as we recounted tales of politics, the new state joining the Union, a letter about American artworks, and even the spotting of a cryptid. We leave the year off in a state of border dispute and conflict that we'll resolve next year. And in the meantime, take a moment and get in contact. You can leave a comment on whatever platform you are listening to this on, review it if the option is there, and most importantly, share the show with somebody that you know. It really makes a difference to me to see that more people are listening to the show, as I would love nothing more than for this to really take off so that I can continue to do this year after year, even after this initial 250-year project is done. I'd really like to take a topic and deep dive it for a week straight, looking at all the little rabbit holes, details, and present that as a complete story on a weekly basis, maybe a 2-hour, 3-hour long show where we can just hit every possible avenue of exploration in terms of that story. It'll take you, dear listener, to make that happen. So follow the show, like it, share it, comment, whatever you can do to support the show if you are enjoying it. This has been our story, 250 Years of the United States of America, and as always, thank you for listening.